everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Talking Acquisition. This is the weekly high-energy, informative, and slightly opinionated view on all things acquisition, procurement, and government contracting related. This is the place where the contracting community, the acquisition community, and our industry partners can connect, talk, listen, and learn from each other. My name is William Randolph, and I am your host, and I would like to introduce my co-host, my colleague, my partner, my friend, Soraya Carrera. Hello, Soraya.
Hey, Will, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
It's good to be here with you, my friend.
Excellent. So it's that time of the show where we make sure we lay out our disclaimer, if you will. So are you ready?
All right, I'm ready to go.
All right.
All right, so for our disclaimer, our podcast shares information and views on a variety of topics that impact the federal acquisition community. Our goal is to provide thought leadership and perspective, not to criticize, judge, or render political opinions, although a few of those might slip out. We provide this free service because we are former federal acquisition professionals and leaders. We believe that the creativity, innovation, and effectiveness of our community is unleashed when we share knowledge, information, and learning. We hope you enjoy our podcast, and we welcome the views and comments of our colleagues across the private and public sectors. By the way, I want to say a big thank you to many of our colleagues out there who reached out after our first podcast to thank us for the podcast, to encourage us, and to provide a few topics of conversation. Well, why don't you introduce this week's topic?
All right. And I also want to say thank you very much. It was an amazing launch, if you will. So when we talked earlier, you had something that was on your mind. You had an idea. And I was like, hey, what should we talk about next? And something came just like that. I think it has, meaning for you. So you want to talk about what that is, and then let's just dive in.
Sure. So I want to talk about the purpose of federal government procurement, because all too often what I found is people don't really understand why the procurement process works the way it does, why it's structured the way it does, why the federal acquisition regulations are written the way they are. And I thought you raised an interesting point when we were very quickly talking about this topic about the federal acquisition regulations. You want to give the big surprise?
Yes. So I often in my career have heard people quote scripture and verse of FAR language and, of various, all of the other supplements, if you will. But the one that I rarely heard, and which is the most important, is the statement of guiding principles for the federal acquisition system. FAR Part 1.102. Okay, it lays it out in very clear, crisp language. It lays out why do we do this thing called the federal acquisition system, and it has some motivations and incentives in there. But the biggest piece of it gives us the broad, what I call the golden statement that basically says, hey, if someone had said don't do it, okay, and someone locally has said, hey, you're trying to do the right things for the government, you have mission in mind, and someone locally has said, it may be authorized, but we're not going to do that, then it's open. Let's talk about it. We can take our talents and deploy against them. It doesn't say we have to do it, but it's open. It's in the art of the possible. That's the piece I love about the framework, is that it gives you all the latitude. We really have all the latitude we need to get going in terms of the purpose of government procurement.
Well, and that was one of the basic tenets from which we stood up our Procurement Innovation Lab over at DHS. And in fact, if you look at their handbooks, the guides that they use to teach and the discussions that we often have, it is about the federal acquisition regulation is encouraging innovation. It does encourage seeking new ways, better ways to do things. It doesn't stop you from doing that. Certainly, there are rules and regulations, and the purpose of federal government procurement is really to protect the companies, the government, and to protect the taxpayer dollar. It's to ensure that we are properly using those taxpayer dollars when we go out to buy the goods and services that the government needs. And we do buy based on need. It's not like we're just writing blank checks. In fact, I say that because I've been at many conferences where, companies who don't really know the federal government, or sometimes just because they're being clever, they go, "Hey, are you going to write me a check?" I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way, but you're welcome to bid on the process. But the whole process was structured to create transparency, to promote that opportunity for fairness and competitiveness in the process. Sole source is by exception. The language is exception, right? If you go back and read FAR Part 6, I think it is, right? I got that right, because you're quoting FAR. FAR Part 6 is the exceptions to competition.
Yes,
competition
absolutely.
is really what it's all about. And it's about ensuring that we create competitive processes, that we enable competitive processes that really give fair opportunities to all who want to play, whether you're a new company, a small company, a mid-tier, because that's a category that people categorize themselves, large, or whether if you've never done business with the federal government before, you have an opportunity to come in and learn how to do business. And it even creates opportunities for companies to come together to compete for products and services. So I personally don't look at the world as negatively as some do when they go, "Oh, regulations, oh, it's a bureaucracy." I don't look at it in the negative. I see what it's intended to do. I see the intent of the transparency. I will say that it's unfortunate that every time someone does something bad, sometimes people think you got to write a regulation to protect against that instead of punish those that did bad and make sure that you continue to reward those who do the well. And so sometimes we over regulate some things, or we try to over document the files, right? You gave a great example. I'm not going to steal your thunder, but my point is the process is there for a reason. It's valid. It's useful, and if you understand it and you're willing to keep an open mind, that process can really work very well.
It can. And you mentioned it just a minute ago. I remember when I was growing up young in my career, whenever you had to take the cost and pricing class, you had to go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's where cost and pricing was trained in the DoD environment. And in the museum at Wright-Patterson, they have a copy of the Wright brothers contract for 22 flying machines for the Department of War. And that contract was 1 page long. It was about a legal size page, but it was 1 page long for 22, however rudimentary aircraft, at the time. And now I think about it is that, you buy copy paper or boots or something very simple, and it's a 50-page procurement, and it's or the solicitation terms and conditions. And I often have said and thought about it from a context of all of those terms and conditions that you see, all of the clauses and provisions that we see in solicitations. Those are attempts to combat something that happened previously that was like, okay, we don't want that to happen again. So we're going to build a clause, we're going to build a provision that says something else may happen, but that thing is not going to happen again. So the FAR is really chock full of reactions to things that have gone horribly wrong in the past that we're saying, okay, let's write some language. I just always am I'm concerned that too much burden is falling on contracting officers, and that they're being the gatekeepers of things that are loosely associated with procurement.
Oh, I 100% agree. If you look at a lot of the terms and conditions that are contained in our contracts, they have very little to do with the buy and have a lot to do with labor laws or environmental regulations.
Policy objectives.
And those, exactly, they're policy initiatives. And so, and that's a comment that I've often made about the contracting officer, that over the years, the volume of transactions and even the dollar value of what we spend hasn't really gone up dramatically. If you really look at the budgets from year to year, they really haven't changed dramatically, but what has changed is the responsibility of the CO. We put a much greater burden on our contracting officers. And so sometimes when you're pitching for getting additional resources, for adding personnel to your rosters, especially those of us in the procurement business, senior procurement executives, you get pushback because people want to look at the numbers only. And I'm
Absolutely.
going, no, no, no. But what you're not realizing is the productivity level of the CO has changed dramatically.
Yes.
It used to be that you could, I mean, I can remember a time when I probably processed a good, I don't know, 15, 20 requisitions a month without batting an eyelash,
Yeah.
right? You could just get it done because you could crank them out. You can't do that now
Those
because
days
you
are
got to
done.
administer the contract, right?
Yeah.
You got to talk about, the
Yeah.
stages that we go through, whether it's planning, solicitation, evaluation, award, or post-award, which, by the
Yes.
way, has become increasingly more important. People are finally figuring out,
Yeah.
great, you wrote a beautiful contract. Now you got to manage the damn thing and you got to
Absolutely.
deliver, right? You got to
Yeah.
go land, you got to build the plane so you can go land the plane, right?
Yeah.
And so, so it's one of the things that I always think about is the burden that we're putting on our contracting officers, because we are, putting in place regulations to cover all these other facets that are extremely important, that we should be paying attention to, but it is a burden we're adding. And that doesn't mean that some of the other agencies don't engage with us. Of course, there's a labor department that you can take compliance issues to. There's small business administration that you can take small business issues to. Not saying that they're not there, but I'm saying there's an extra added burden on the contracting officer, and that burden continues to expand.
Agreed.
Take a look right now, just right now with President Biden, and it's not unique to him. They have a bunch of executive orders that impact procurement.
Sure.
Whether it's the Build It in America by American people, I'm probably not saying the title correctly, but anyway, it's built, it's basically Buy American on steroids, right? Making sure that we're buying American and that we're building it here using our American talents here. Whether it's the diversity one and serving businesses in underserved communities. Very important topics. I do not disagree with any of that. But it does put an additional burden on the contracting officers. And, the interesting thing is that when these things come out, we have a tendency to train the procurement or the acquisition professional. We sometimes forget to train everybody else that's affected by
it. They have to touch it. Yeah,
like
agreed.
Folks, right?
Yeah, agreed. So, I did a little research right before we started, and there were 72 executive orders, 72. And of those, someone had done some analysis. Found an article, someone had done some analysis, and 24 of them, roughly 1/3 of them, had a direct touch that they would be implemented in some fashion through the acquiring of goods and services in the federal acquisition stuff. So 1/3 of them, literally 1/3 of them, there's going to be mechanisms, either contracting officers, programs, cost, the acquisition system is going to be involved in either ensuring that it occurs, one, so actionable, or two, having the checks and balances, kind of the quality assurance on the other hand, on side, to ensure that it was done upstream somewhere. And those are 24 things that a busy set of contracting officers, contract specialists, and acquisition community, which was already busy. Here are 24 more things. We're just going to peanut butter spread those over the community in various departments and agencies. And it is, this is one of those opinions. I'm concerned. Here's an opinion, and here's warning. Here's an opinion. I'm concerned that that these continued peanut butter spreads of things or activities and initiatives that contracts folks have to engage in, either be the action person or the gatekeeper to ensure that it happens. I wonder if they're going to, are we reaching an inflection point where they're going to be overtaxed, and that the actual act of buying is harmed by the execution of policy objectives. So opinion, but
Look, I think it's a very valid point. It is an additional burden. And here's the thing, it's also a burden on industry, right? Because industry has to comply with these things, and they have to respond to these things. And if a CO forgets to include something, industry needs to go raise a hand, because they also have to comply. These are the laws of our country. These are the regulations that govern our processes. So I'm with you. I share your concern. One of the things that I think is extremely important, I know we're going to talk in a future podcast about our acquisition workforce, which is a topic that is very near and dear to our hearts as former leaders in this profession. And I got to tell you, every day, that's what I think about. I think about the acquisition workforce. But it's a topic near and dear to my heart, but it's how we train them. how we train them. You can't send somebody to a 1-week class, lay out all this stuff, and then go, hey, go back to your desk and remember that.
Sure.
I think you gotta design the training system to provide that, what I call just-in-time training, that ability to hit you with like a 1-hour training on here's what you got to do. In fact, we started doing a lot of that when I was at DHS. I really pushed hard on things like learning, what we call them learning cafes, webinars, and those kinds of things where we just provided like on the spot, just in time training, a quick 1-hour session on the Buy American Act. You know, Buy American, the new executive order is, I'm not going to say it's the same, it's similar to something that was done under the previous administration, because there was a push in the previous administration.
Absolutely.
On Buy American. I don't know if you remember that, about compliance, raising the threshold of content, et cetera. And even the price factor got raised under the previous. They implemented it like in January of this year, but there was an executive order on that. And when that came out, I sat down with my team and we devised a quick 1-hour training with quick hit training materials to help our CEOs, because you're not going to remember everything.
You're not.
And some of these things are a little complicated. Some of these formulas are a little complicated when you talk about evaluating factors and adding price factors, et cetera. So I share your concern.
Yeah, I have often believed that, I use this phrasing that some people want to be taught how to fish. Some people just want to fish. And then ultimately, there's a group of people that just want a fish sandwich. It's like, look, give me the thing I need to do the job. Exactly. So that's why I love the just-in-time concept. That's fish sandwich all day long. Look, I'm busy. I've got things to do. I know I have some obligations and some responsibilities. Give me the things I need to do to satisfy the obligation. So I think that's a really good strategy of just-in-time stuff. When the issue comes up, have something to address it right then. You can go back to your desk and do that and do the activity.
And something that you can go back and refer to, right?
Yes.
It's there, it's available online these days, whether you have, cheat sheets or just a quick video that you can click on, or a webinar you can go back and refer to. I think it's extremely important. The other thing is heightening awareness for those who just want the fish sandwich. Because it's not enough to just teach the people in the acquisition community and then let them go off do the battle. I think there has to be general awareness. People do have to understand what is the purpose of the procurement program. I can remember early in my career that when I would talk to some of the engineers and scientists and IT guys that I used to work with, what I used to say to them is, you got to understand something. The process is designed to promote the socioeconomic programs and the policies of the administration.
Yeah.
So whether you like it or not, when you go to buy that little computer chip or that computer, we are promoting fairness and competitiveness in the process. We are promoting the use of small businesses, and we're promoting the use of certain categories of small businesses. And I used to have to try to help people understand that this process was really designed to support and protect the American taxpayer, the businesses that are out here that we work with, and promote fairness. Now, do some of the processes go a little bit too far? Well, I could start talking about protests, but I won't. By the way, I want to say one thing. I am an advocate of the protest process. I am not opposed to the protest process, but I do think that there need to be limitations. I think it's spiraled a little bit out of control, and it's become costly for both industry and government.
Yeah, so I really want to pull that string a little bit, because when we were talking earlier, there was some real energy around that. I am a big believer in protest resiliency, that you can't control protests. They happen. That's a demand signal that's out of government's control, if you will. However, we can have increased levels of resiliency based on the strategies we use, the processes we use, the documentation that we do, and even the way our increased levels of communication. I've seen protests materialize and go horribly wrong just because the levels of communication between government and industry weren't there, or they were sub-optimized, and that the protest channel was the only channel people could use to force communication. So what are your thoughts around the, kind of what the role of protest and its level of goodness? Because I do think the process has some goodness in it.
Oh, I agree. Look, the purpose of the protest is to keep us all honest, to make sure that we've handled the process the way we said we would handle it, that we
Right.
followed the structure, the guidance that we provided in the solicitation, that we treated the companies fairly, and then we shared with them the results. That's called debriefings, right? That we shared with them the results of the process and how they did. Unfortunately, a couple of things come into play. Protests make people gun shy. People get very risk averse. And so what happens is we got into these, what I call letter debriefings, right? Where we put the debriefing in a letter. And I'm okay with that. I'm cool with that. But that doesn't mean you give less information. You got to give more, I think, when it's a written debriefing, right? And you have to give an opportunity for industry to perhaps ask you a few questions. But you put a limit, right? You got to put a limit around everything, right? Because you could just go on indefinitely. And so I'm a huge advocate of in-person debriefings is my preference, but I get it. I understand why we do letter debriefings, especially when you have a high volume of proposals. But I think we can't be short on detail. Industry wants detail. They want to understand. They really want to understand. They're going to get the detail anyway when they file a protest, right? So I think sometimes we're a little risk averse and we don't share enough information. Like you said, we lower the level of the communications when we need to be increasing them. The other comment that I'll make about protests, because I am a huge advocate of protests, is though there has to be a box around it. You can't just keep protesting indefinitely. And that's what you see with a lot of these large multiple award procurements. There are companies, I'm not saying everyone does this, I never say 100% anybody, but there are companies out there that will just keep filing and keep filing because they figure eventually they're going to wear you down and you're going to make an award. And by the way, for the record, I never got worn down.
It just gives me more energy.
You don't know how many CEOs I infuriated because they wanted to make an award and I said, not no, but hell no. We're going to keep going. We got to protect the reputation. If we did our job right, if we did our job right, then we fight.
We fight.
And if we didn't do our job right, we take corrective action
and move on.
And we do make mistakes, by the way. We make mistakes. We're human, right? And so if we've done something wrong, we should take the corrective action. But if we haven't, then fight. That's me. I'm just letting you know.
I have always dreamed of our procurement leadership making some, having some edict, kind of at the federal level that says like every company gets 1 or 2 protests a year. It's like here's your 2 protest chits for the year. Okay. And then I think if there were some scarcity added to the system, then when they are used, they would be truly for issues that were protestable, that there was some gravity behind them, and then you would get out of this protesting for longevity. It's like, look, if we can just, even if in a situation, let's say the incumbent is not the successful offerer, but if the incumbent can continue the contract, fight in the protest for 60, 90, 100 days, that it's like it's in their best interest to continue on longevity. Forget about the implications of the protest or the implications of the mission. It's just you're protesting for longevity. So I've always dreamed one of these days that'll come true.
So I took a different twist on that, but I never thought about that. That you have a few protest chits as a company per year. Sorry. Anyway, but I had a different twist on that, and I actually put forth this suggestion before, and they always push back because of small businesses. I felt that it should cost you something to protest. I think a company should have to pay a fee to protest. But that fee goes into an account. I would put it in an interest-bearing account and put it into an account. And if you win, you get your fee back plus whatever else.
Yes.
But if you lose, the government gets that fee. Because here's the deal. Sometimes when protests are frivolous, where do we go to recover that money?
Right.
And don't tell me that the administrative cost is $250. Isn't that in the
Right.
Yeah, that's what I spent the first minute when I was thinking about
exactly.
it. Right? Exactly. So, but I always thought about like a fee-based approach, which would be a little bit more discouraging of frivolous protests.
Yeah.
Because there are frivolous protests. There are people out there that it's a strategy. If we lose, we're going to protest automatically. I mean, they're like ready to go for the stay and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I just want to bring meaningfulness back to the process because I have heard many companies learn. I always remember this from one of our reverse industry days that a company said, We protest more to learn than we do to win.
Yes, yes. And that's powerful. So I love that idea as well. I think both of them are simply saying the system has to have some cost associated. We
Right.
live in an incentive driven, this is an incentives driven environment.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a good point.
so the system must be designed so there are either incentives or disincentives to influence, I won't use control, but to influence behavior. So I love that idea, you know. So hopefully someone in our community is listening and it's like, here's some ideas if you want to reshape this thing, you know, and align it to value and incentives, you know, and having some penalties for bad actors. That's really the thing. The good actors, look, we want you, if something's wrong, we want to fix it. It is the bad actors that we want to make sure that the system disincentivizes bad actor activity.
Exactly. We want the process to be fair. We want the process to treat people fairly. At least I know that I always did, and I know you did.
Yeah.
Our goal is fairness in the process. And if we do something wrong, then definitely we should correct it or pay the penalty for not having corrected it, right? So I'm definitely in favor. And that's why I always, when people, oh, protest, and we should get rid of protests. Because I used to hear people say that, and I go, no, I like the protest, but I like that reclama approach where you can come back and seek restitution if you believe something was done wrong. I did want to touch on one more thing.
Absolutely.
Post-award part of procurement. Because when I was coming up, and I'm sure you saw this too, we always focused on how many contracts got awarded, did you promote competition, did you get small business, blah, 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 blah. And there were no real metrics. Right. And I still don't think we have great metrics on contract administration. And I will tell you, I always loved the planning stage, the evaluation stage, and post-award. The other parts, anybody else could do them. Go ahead, have at it, right? Those were my favorite. You know why? Because those were the stages where you could make something really happen. Sure. In that planning phase, you can really lay out that strategy, what we're going to do, how we're going to buy, blah, 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 engage with industry. Evaluation is where you're really, the rubber meets the road. You're really looking at how they responded, do they meet the requirement, et cetera. But then post-award. You know, when that honeymoon's over, after y'all, sign the contract, shake hands, blow kisses at each other, the game begins, right? Yeah. Now you got to deliver on this thing where we wrote the requirements, I don't know, 4, 6, 12 months ago, maybe even 2 years ago. And you wrote a proposal 3, 4, maybe 6 months ago. And now we got to deliver. And things do change. Priorities change. The requirements do change. Even what you told me in your proposal, technology has moved forward, et cetera. And to me, I think that's probably the hardest part of procurement, making it work.
I think so. I think so. And Soraya, I believe that's where the government still has an opportunity to unlock additional value is in post-award, because I always thought about the pre-award stuff as the sexy stuff. That's where people get awards and certifications and notifications, and they get all of this rah-rah, and it's great, it's awesome. But when you stop to think about it, all of the pre-award activity is theoretical. Okay, it's not real yet. It's promises, it's commitments, but it's not real yet. As soon as that contract award, it gets really, really real.
Exactly.
Okay. And then you've got actually levers, you got things to pull, you got things can happen because you're really delivering either in a supplies or especially in services, but especially in a supplies or hardware, environment. You got real stuff. Somebody's bending iron and making stuff. It's real there. So that's why I love that. I also have an affinity for that. May have been growing up in a systems acquisition environment.
Exactly.
You get a love.
Well, you have to sit down. And there's puts and takes, and there's negotiation, and it's negotiation with the whole team. It's not just the contracting officer and the contractor. You got to bring in your lawyers, your program folks, your financial folks, because everything's on the table when you're sitting down and you are negotiating throughout that process.
Absolutely.
You are a lot of people don't realize it, but you are negotiating throughout that process to figure out how we're going to make this thing work. And I think that one of the things we need to do a better job of in the federal government, and God knows I struggled with this, and I know almost every leader in procurement struggles with this, is how do we measure the effectiveness? And everybody's going to say, well, measure the output. I hear that one, right? That sounds really good.
That's a go-to.
go do it. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's measuring that satisfaction, not only with the product, because sometimes you might not be successful with the product, right? The product might not turn out to be what you want it to be.
Right.
But did the process work?
Yeah.
Did you
The
get that answer fast enough? Right.
Yeah.
So, and did you learn enough so that when you go back out, now you know what you're going to get? I think we've got to come up with better metrics for that. And we got to reward that a little bit more. We got to stop just talking about the contracts that didn't work and start talking about the ones that did. Because you know what? The problem is we put all the emphasis on that one bad contract, just like we put the emphasis on that one bad CO that did something dumb. And we forget that there's a whole huge community. It's doing really great stuff.
Doing great stuff.
Many contracts that are extremely successful.
Agreed.
So that's one of my pet peeves in procurement that I always was constantly thinking about. How do we promote that side of the business? Because I think that's hard. And what made me think about that was just the other day, I was talking to a colleague who just went through a pretty tough negotiation. And she joked around. She said, I channeled a lot of my inner Soraya because she used to preach about the negotiation.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I love it. Well, Soraya, as we always said, our greatest challenge in doing this is stopping, okay? Because I know we've got so much things we want to talk about, and we've hit on 2 or 3 things that I think will be future episodes going forward. As we always like to do, we want to leave with the nugget. It's like, let's get something actionable. So from a standpoint of the things that we've talked about, the purpose of government procurement, what's the nugget? What'd you like to leave our community with today?
The process can be daunting, but the process is designed to promote fairness, transparency, and competition. And I want people to think about that. As you're working through the procurement process, always remember, we are the federal government of the United States, and we are here to represent the taxpayer. And yes, I'm saying we, because I still consider myself very much a part of the system. Absolutely. The system was not designed to be painful, but it was designed to work. It can be painful at times, but get through that pain, because believe you me, it's worth it when done right. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. So my nugget is simply this: the system is designed to advance mission goals. Right. In the end, that's what it's intended to do. We have a lot of things that get spreaded on top of it: public policy objectives, things, motivations, incentives to adapt and change behavior. But in the end, we are here. The community is here. We are here to serve, and we serve in the advancement of the goals. Never take your eye off of the advancing of the goals. Okay. And with that, Soraya, another one in the books.
All right.
Thank you so very much. This has been fun.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Yes.
See you next week when we
see you next week.
Acquisition.
All right. And we're out. Be well, folks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.